Mr. Brian Bloch, Ombudsman for the United States Department of Interior, Washington, D.C. Mr. Bloch formerly served as the consultant for the Mediation and Conciliation Project of the Supreme Court of India for 10 years. The project aimed at providing training to judges and senior advocates across India. Mr. Bloch works as mediator for the Multi-Door Dispute Resolution Division of the Superior Court of Washington, D.C. We are honored, and it is our privilege to have Mr. Bloch joining us today from USA. We thank you, sir, for taking your time out and addressing us this conference. I yield the floor to you, sir.
Okay, well, good morning. It's 3 in the morning here in Washington, D.C. I don't think I've ever put a tie on at 3 in the morning in my entire life. So I'm very happy to be with you all today. And I thought I'd just begin. So yeah, I'm a mediator and conflict resolver, part of ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution. And as most of you know, so a mediator is not a judge. It's different than private arbitration, what to speak of litigation in the courtroom. But it has ancient origins. In Sanskrit and in Bengali, it's madhyamasta, or is the word for mediator in some ancient texts. And I personally, I lived in India for 21 years, and as in the introduction, traveled to pretty much every high court in the country, working with a team that was making presentations to judges and lawyers, introducing, at that time, 10 years ago, introducing mediation as court annex mediation in the system in India. And I've done hundreds, maybe even thousands, over 1,000 mediations over the years, and also personally have been a student of the Bhagavad Gita, have read that for over 40 years. And I find it really interesting that the Gita takes place on a battlefield, and yet at the same time, the words Shanti and Ahimsa, they appear many, many times throughout the text. And that's a very interesting situation. So as I was preparing for this, I was thinking of what inspirations do I get from the Gita in my work as a conflict resolver, as a peace builder. And I thought I'd make a little presentation about that. And so I will go in and out of sharing my screen, because I'll just show this. Yeah, here we go. So lessons in ADR from the Bhagavad Gita. And I have 8 of them, and I'll check my timing so I don't go over time. So the first one is an interesting one, that how is this inspirational, acknowledging that the world is a place of suffering? Because in the Gita, several places Krishna says dukkalayam. He uses the word, like alaya means the place, and dukkha, we all know what that means, the place of suffering. Or he says anityam asukam loka, that asukam, sukha means happiness, asukha means lack of happiness. So how does that inspire a peace builder or a mediator or someone who trying to help two parties deal with whatever conflict they're having? Well, I don't find it discouraging. I find it kind of like a reality check that not to maintain unreasonable hopes. There are times in a mediation where at the end people literally, hug each other and they can't believe that, how different they are now than the 3 hours before the mediation began. And I've had instances of that, over the years. One time in Patna, I was doing a mediation that, at least I'm told, went back to 1950. And the grandchildren were fighting the grandparents' conflict. And it did work miraculously. I had they didn't, my Hindi, Tora, so I also had someone who was helping me sometimes in the translation work. These people didn't speak English so well. And they did embrace each other after 60 years of conflict. But generally, the idea is I just feel that even if I can reduce people's miseries a little bit, then I've been successful. Even if they work out their conflict about partition or some financial dealings, I've helped a little bit. They may not love each other afterwards, because acknowledging that dukhalaya, it's a tough place to live this world. But still, it's very inspiring for me when I'm able to at least help people somewhat. And I find even if there's not a settlement in a mediation, usually by the conversation, by talking to each other, by learning a little bit more about one another, by maybe developing at least a little, if not a lot, of empathy for one another, there's some progress that has been made. So that's the first one. And the second one is about the three gunas in the Gita, in the 14th chapter, 17th chapter, and the 18th chapter. Krishna describes these gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And he says that everything in this world is influenced by these three gunas. And sometimes, of course, there's combinations, just like in you take the three primary colors and you combine them, and there's different shades and different colors that come out. But still, having this basic idea of sattva, rajas, and tamas, or goodness, passion, and ignorance, I found to be really helpful in my work in a mediation, because Krishna says that these affect pretty much everything about us, the way we eat, the kind of food that we choose, the way we work in relationships, our behavior in different circumstances. And so I find for myself as a mediator, as a peace builder, that a mediator in the mode of goodness, which is what I try to do, is really truly neutral, or sometimes we use the word equally partial to all parties, is I try to be patient, calm, fair, sometimes even comforting, determined, and a little detached. These are qualities of sattva guna, of goodness. And I find it so helpful in a mediation if I'm influenced by that sattva. But a mediator in passion, in rajas, is often pushing for their own solutions, because as a mediator, we help the parties come to their own conclusions. But sometimes when we're influenced by rajas, we're like, I know what the answer is to this problem, and I kind of push for it. That's kind of more of our Rajasic kind of consciousness. And I also think that I'm very concerned about the outcome. I want people to say, okay, Brian solved another problem. And there's a nice saying that I like about mediation, and that is that you have a choice. You can either be a good mediator, or you can take credit for being a good mediator, but you can't do both. So in this, as being a good mediator, one really has to try to leave their ego at the door and really focus on, it's kind of on seva, that here I am, these two parties are in conflict, and I'm trying to serve them by helping them overcome that conflict. And people pick up on that. That, again, that's a very sattvic thing, but in Rajas, we are really like, almost like so attached. Oh no, you got to work this out. And there's a lot of anxiety, even in the mind and the heart of the mediator, thinking that his or her ego is on the line, whether the parties settle or not. And of course, also in the mode of passion, the mediator may favor one side or the other. I remember quite some time ago, I was, I'll just spotlight myself for a few minutes here. I was doing a training at I don't know if some of you may be familiar with the KC Law College in Churchgate in Mumbai. So I was doing a presentation. At one point, I asked for 3 volunteers to do a mock mediation. So there was a gentleman who played the role of the mediator, a young woman and another man. And the young woman, I would assume, especially in the eyes of the mediator, was quite attractive. So the whole time he was doing the mediation, he was only looking at her. He pretty much ignored the other gentleman who was doing the role play. And it just said, okay, that's rajas. That's the mode of passion that we favor one over the other. And a mediator influenced by the mode of ignorance will often be discourteous, easily frustrated, distracted, maybe looking at their phone all the time. You see, it is 3:17 in the morning here in Washington, D.C., and not very effective. And often when the mediator is very rajarsic or tamasic, they're not very well trusted by the parties, and then that, of course, makes having a good outcome that much harder to do. So the third one is practicing patience. Krishna talks about this in the Gita in the 18th chapter. Interestingly, he goes through the whole Bhagavad Gita, like 690 verses by that time. And then he says to Arjuna, he said, is everything okay? Do I need to repeat myself? Do you understand? And then, of course, Arjuna says, Nashta moham. No, my illusion is gone. But Krishna was literally ready to start the whole Gita again if he needed to, if Arjuna needed that to understand it. So I really get a lot of inspiration from that, because sometimes, I'm sure as lawyers also you have this experience that sometimes things are just dragging on, or in a mediation, one party is just talking and talking and talking, or they don't seem to have moved an inch. They're still really in conflict with each other. And I just have to take some deep breaths, practice some mindfulness, maybe, do quietly some pranayama. I mean, I'm not going to, do a whole pranayama thing in front of them, but just cool down and be patient. And I find it's amazing that sometimes when I do that, and the parties kind of pick up on that, and they also calm down, and the patience really pays off. So being patient is quite a virtue in so many things in life, and I find in my profession it's essential sometimes, because things just don't always go the way we want them to go, at least at first. And also what's really interesting is at the beginning of a mediation, sometimes the ones that I think are going to solve real easily drag on for days or at least hours. And sometimes the things that I think are going to be real difficult, parties settle in a matter of a very short period of time. So it's really a practice in patience to be a good mediator, to be a good at resolving conflicts. Okay. I think we're doing fine in terms of time, actually. Treating people equally. So in the 5th chapter of the Gita, there's 2 shlokas that are really powerful. The first one says that one is a perfect yogi who, by comparison to his own self, sees the true equality of all beings in both their happiness and distress. So a real spiritual person sees that the soul is inside of everyone. And then a very famous verse that falls after that, and let me see if I remember the Sanskrit, Vidya Vinaya Sampane, Brahmane Gavihastini, Suni Chaiva Sopakecha. And then the last line is very important. Pandita, a learned person, Sama, equal, Darshina, sees everyone equally. Whether they're a learned person or they can't read or write, whether they're wealthy or poor, whether they're well-behaved or a little rough, the spiritualist in the Gita and the mediator or the judge in a court has to see with this, or at least practice this samadarshina, this seeing people equally. And it's a it's a sadhana, it's a practice. It doesn't come automatically. There's times when, like I said, one person's being very rough and rude, and the other person's being very polite. And so there would be some tendency to, well, this person's, the kind of person that, really deserves a proper settlement. And this person, well, who cares? But it's a great practice to catch myself and say, no, in my mind, say, no, samadarshana, I have to treat everyone equally. And that's so important, from an ethical point of view, especially as a court annex mediator, let's say in the Indian context, or just to get good settlements. If one of the parties picks up that you're favoring the other party, there's a good chance they want to just check out. They'll either mentally they'll check out, or they'll literally say, let's carry on with the court case. Because at least I haven't worked so closely. I've kept in touch with my friendships in the court system in India, but I haven't been dealing directly with it so much in recent years. But at least in the past, one of the trainings that we were doing was giving judges some training in what would be appropriate cases to refer to a court annex mediation. For example, the Delhi High Court has a very well-established mediation program there. And Tamil Nadu also, in my time, Bangalore also in my time was very much like that. And the idea, of course, is if mediation didn't settle, then they would be back in court. So this idea of treating everyone equally is so important for a mediator or for a person who's trying to follow the teachings of the Gita. And what's really cool is, in this case, you can do both. You can that it's helpful. Following the Gita also helps one be a really good mediator. Okay, so let's continue. So, and this is kind of connected. Number 5 is connected to number 4. Seeing the good in all others. Krishna says that all living entities are part of him, are his, and are the soul, not the body. And so that means that ultimately, although we may not be manifesting it at the present moment, ultimately when, let's use the Gita technology, when tamas and rajas are diminished, or let's say, hopefully even disappear, and sattva is established, and even beyond that, bhakti towards Krishna is established, the true nature of the person emerges. And that everyone has that true nature. Right now it's covered by rajas and tamas. And so keeping that in mind, I've found as a mediator is really inspiring to try, and also to, there's this idea in my wife was a ICSE, that's right, yeah, ICSE teacher, school principal in Uttar Pradesh for many years when we were living in India. And this idea for and when she trains young teachers, she would often talk about this idea of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You treat the child as if they're going to be well-behaved, as if they're going to learn the lesson, and lo and behold, they often do. And so I find when I treat the parties in a mediation as if they're good people, they have God in their heart, they are and I treat them with respect, they often kind of live up to that in the mediation process. So this presentation that Krishna makes in the Gita of having respect for every living entity, and showing that in a real sense, it's so helpful in helping parties reach a settlement in their case. So the next one. This is from the 12th chapter of the Gita. And in that chapter, I think it's verse 8 to 11, but don't quote me on that. Krishna talks about a progression. He says, okay, just love me, just be a pure devotee, and that's the goal of this whole book. So just do that. But if you can't do that, that's all right. If you can't do that, then do sadhana, do some practices that will lead you to that goal. And if you can't do that, then be a good person, give charity, be honest. And if you can't do that, so there's like these 4 steps of progression. And I really love that in terms of just practical life, that you can't always immediately reach the highest goal that you're trying to set for yourself. But there's if you're making some progress, if there's steps towards that, that is in one sense the goal. Life is it's not just the reaching the conclusion, it's how you get there. It's the journey. So in a mediation, sure, I would love if they settled all the matters in a real amicable way, and at the end they offer namaskars, and they maybe if they're in a situation where they're going to have ongoing relations with each other, for example, in a partition where the 2 brothers are fighting or something like that, that's great if they either figuratively or literally embrace one another. But that's not always what happens. And so if I think that that's the only success of a mediation, I'm not going to be a very happy mediator. So, okay, they can't do that. Maybe they can settle all their issues, even if they don't get along with each other that well. If they can't do that, maybe they can settle some of their issues. If they can't do that, maybe they can settle one of the things that brought them to the mediation. And that's quite an inspiration for the peacebuilder, that you can't always get a 10 every time, but a 5 may be just great. And I think that's a good lesson in life as well. We strive for our highest sense of who we are, but even if we're in the process of getting there, that can be quite satisfying. So we go on to number 7. And this is depending on God, depending on Krishna, or however we understand, God to be in our faith. This is from the 18th chapter of the Gita, where Krishna says that in all activities, he tells Arjuna, just depend upon me and work always under my protection. In this way, be fully conscious of me. So for me, as you can see, I'm a person who I'm a person of faith. And there are times in the mediation where I just think, God, you got to help me here, because I have no idea what I'm doing, and this is going nowhere. And I just find that is so helpful. Obviously, I don't say it out loud, and I, it's between me and God, because the people I may be mediating with, they may be atheists. They may not care about that I'm in that mindset. So I'm not making an external show of that. But there are just many times when I can see that it's beyond my expertise, my capabilities. Just like, Draupadi, she tried to, stop the Kauravas from taking away her sari. And only when she kind of, raised both hands and said, hey, Govinda, did, the limitless sari appear. So in my mind, I'm thinking, this is really going nowhere. God, please help me. And I find that whether the mediation is successful or not, it really uplifts my spirits, and also often makes me much more effective in my work as a mediator, because it lowers my anxiety level, that I have to figure everything out and I have to do all of this. And it lifts me up to a different level of consciousness where I'm doing my best, it's like in the 8th chapter of the Gita, Krishna says, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mamanusmara yudhyacha. He says, mamanusmara, remember me and do your duty. So it's not that I'm not doing my duty. I'm not, all the things that go in the mind of the mediator as it's going on, and the training that I've had as a mediator. But also, in my mind, I'm thinking, help. And I find that that's really it's great. and it really helps the mediation as well. And finally, this last one is not something that I would use in a court annexed mediation, and in a high court. But I often do mediations also in faith-based organizations. And in that case, and I've worked with churches here in America. I've worked in synagogues, Jewish temples, Hindu temples. I've worked with people practicing Islam, or specifically I work with some Sufi organizations. And in those situations, I call it seeking a theocentric peace. And that is a God-centered peace. And in the last verse of the 5th chapter of the Gita, Krishna says, Bhoktaram yagatapasam sarva loka maheshwaram suridam sarva bhutanam gyatvam shantim richati. So this is the peace formula, the 29th verse of the 5th chapter. This is where Krishna gives 3 aspects of developing real peace within yourself. Bhoktaram yagatapasam, that our activities should be for God's pleasure. Sarva loka maheshwaram, that everything belongs to him ultimately. We come to the world with nothing, we leave the world with nothing. And then my favorite part, suridam, that God is our surit, he's our friend. And the friend of all living entities. And one who understands those 3 things, shanti. So if I'm with people, if it's a faith-based mediation, because people in faith-based organizations also have conflicts, no doubt. I sometimes say, whatever faith it is, would you like to say a prayer in the beginning? Would you mind if I say a prayer in the beginning? And I find that sets a certain kind of tone. You can't be too angry with the other person when you're both praying to the same God, like that. So obviously, again, this wouldn't be appropriate in a courtroom or a court annex mediation, but in a faith-based mediation, it can be quite powerful. So those are 8 inspirations that I get from my study in the Gita that I have applied in my work in India, and even I apply in a very non-religious context here in working for the United States government and working for the superior courts as a mediator. And I hope they were helpful for you and maybe give you some inspiration. So thank you very much.